G'day, welcome to Say It With Guitars. I'm your host, Pete Cornelius. Each episode I'll be digging deep and getting to hang with some of Australia's finest guitar pickers, songwriters, producers, collectors and makers. I look forward to bringing you these fun conversations and I hope you enjoy Say It With Guitars. Hello out there folks, thanks for joining us. Series 2 is upon us. It's real, it's here, it's now, it's a thing. I'm excited, folks. Yeah, it's going to be great. Got some excellent conversations coming your way with some fantastic talent from around Australia. And yeah, I'm going to trickle feed that into your subscription or whatever you might call it, your podcast platform. So yeah, today's episode is number 1 of Series 2 with our good friend Phil Manning. Phil Manning's a great performer, guitar player, and he's been a massive influence on me over the years. So I'm pretty excited to have a chat with Phil. It's only the tip of the iceberg though, folks. We could have talked for hours. Phil had a time restraint, so we got down to business and we'll probably do it again soon. So anyway, enjoy our conversation with Phil Manning. Before we crack into today's show, I'd like to shout out to our sponsor, Mr. Billy Tarrant from Tarrant Guitars. Billy's an amazing luthier and he makes some real sweet instruments. I'm lucky enough for him to have built me a 00 size acoustic guitar, which I've dragged all around the country and it's sounding better than ever. So yeah, check out tarrantguitars.net.au, Tassie's one-stop custom workshop for custom-made guitars, all guitar repairs and services. Let's get into the show. I'd like to welcome to today's chat on Say It With Guitars, Mr. Phil Manning. Phil, how you going?
Pete, I'm doing well. Lovely
Excellent.
to be here.
Thanks very much for having a chat with us, and just so happens to be in your hometown of Devonport today.
Does indeed.
Not hometown, but the place of your origins.
Yeah. Well, I lived here until I was sort of nearly 18.
Yeah.
And then I went off to Hobart Art School for a while.
Yep.
And then during that year, when I just sort of a bit later on when I turned 18, Tony Worsley came to town in Hobart, and I went and talked to him and ended up 2 days later in Melbourne as his guitarist, and that was the beginning of being a musician all my life. Yeah.
How did that? Because that sounds like a pretty quick change, like between playing around Tasmania and then all of a sudden flying off to Melbourne in the thick of, I'm guessing, the 60s rock and roll scene.
It was 66, yeah.
66. So was Tony, he was in the Blue Jays, is that right?
Yeah.
Were they a big band of their time? Like, was that a lot of...
Yeah, well, Tony had a major hit Australia-wide with a song called Velvet Waters, and he had other hits as well, like I think he did a version of Just a Little Bit, just a tiny little bit, just a little bit of your itsy bitsy bit of your love or something, But what happened was I read in Go Set magazine that Vince Maloney, his guitarist, had left to join the Bee Gees.
Sure.
And of course, the Go Set magazine used to come out weekly, and there was a news agency in Hobart, and I used to go down on Wednesday or Thursday every week and get the New Musical Express from England, a couple of other ones from around the world, and Go Set, because this was me as a really keen follower of what was going on.
Yeah.
And that very week that I read that, Tony was he came down and used a Hobart band to back him.
Right.
And did a show at the Hobart City Hall, one of the worst sounding halls in the world at the time. I'm sure they've probably improved it now. And I just basically fronted up and just said, I'd like to apply for the job. And he said, well, hang around about and I'll do my show. And then after the show, I borrowed someone's Gretsch, I think it was, backstage.
Sure. Yeah.
Played a bit of guitar for him, and he said, "Right, can you come over tomorrow?"
Wow.
And I said, "Oh, I need a day to,
Yeah.
to pack up my things to get organised." So by Monday, I was in Melbourne and rehearsing out at the Scene Ballroom at Canterbury.
Yeah.
With us rehearsing upstairs in a little room and the Purple Hearts rehearsing downstairs.
Right.
So the first day in Melbourne, I saw Lobby Lloyd play.
Wow.
And
Okay.
and that was a bit of a shock to the system, I must admit. And actually, within a year or two, Lobby and I became friends and used to play together a bit, jam together. So yeah, I just immediately was in the midst of it.
And what sort of gigs were they? Were you playing like dance halls?
They were dancers. They had what they called discos.
Yep.
But the discos all had live bands in those days.
Sure.
And, they'd have a DJ playing records in the breaks, but it was, and they just called them discos. Today you'd call them nightclubs,
Gotcha.
And the suburban halls, church halls, that sort of thing. They all had dancers.
Yep.
There were bands everywhere. There were gigs everywhere. It was nothing at that time for acts that had a name to do a lunchtime gig or an afternoon gig, then go and do 2 and 3 spots at night.
Uh-huh.
And, you'd run out. I mean, bands were just starting to get roadies. Some of the bigger bands would have one guy,
Yep.
And so they'd dash out on stage, whack the amps up, drummer would get set up, and then they'd go, "Ladies and gentlemen," and then you'd run on and play for half an hour.
Yep.
And then you'd be off and the next band would be on.
Sure.
And you'd be back in the car going somewhere else to play somewhere.
Wow. Yeah, right. So was there roadies pretty much helping out every band, or was it like a roadie per venue sort of thing?
No, but most bands did it themselves.
Right.
Like, I after Tony Worsley, I left up north. We ended up on the showground circuit, and I didn't enjoy that one bit.
Right.
And well, it wasn't so much that I didn't enjoy it. It was just that I didn't see my future being working on showgrounds.
Yeah, gotcha.
I went back to Melbourne, and then that's where I joined the Bay City Union and got to know Matt Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we couldn't afford a roadie.
Yeah.
But we did have, the occasional friend that would come and help load gig gear in.
Yeah. I guess things were heavier then too. You see a lot of photos from that period, and you're not using small champs and little Princetons. Everyone's using massive, great big Sun amplifiers or M&Rs or Wasps.
Yeah, well, the big amps really came a bit later.
Okay.
At that stage, most people were using little Ampeg amps.
Oh yeah.
Like an Ampeg. I don't know what they were, probably 40 watts or something with 112,
Yep.
or they were using Vox AC30s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Golden Tones, a lot of Golden Tone amps.
Yep.
And then they brought out those dreadful Burns amplifiers. Then, of course, Jimi Hendrix and Cream happened.
Yeah.
And immediately everyone wanted to get a Marshall stack.
Yeah.
And so the amps went from being these little tiny things to huge things. And by the time Chain, even by 1968, I was using a 412 cabinet with an M&R amp. By 1971, after Chain had Black and Blue and Judgment, we were using, like the bass player had, I think he had 3 15s and 6 12s. I had anywhere from 8 12s to 12 12s.
Wow.
The PA was 16 12s.
Goodness me.
And in the end, the drummer got so frustrated he bought his own PA, and so the drums were through another PA with 8 12s.
Wow.
And so we were pretty loud, and I'm pretty deaf.
Must have been quite a dynamic time, like when things were so loud, and I guess, but a lot of performances were outside. You think about big environments, big crowds, and probably small PAs in comparison to what we have today. Or probably not small in physical size, but small as in like their actual capacity to fill a space.
Yeah. The PA's power was, generally about 200 watts.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And of course, just being 12 columns.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So they didn't have a lot of projection power.
Yeah.
But by 1970, late 71, early 72, people were starting to use 45, 60 boxes with 10 cell horns on top of them and this sort of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
And of course, those speaker boxes had been around since the 30s.
Right.
Anyway.
Right. So it wasn't new
Because they were
technology.
what they used to use. They called them the voice of the theatre, and so the big picture theatres would have hidden behind a curtain somewhere. Right. They'd have these big bins, like modern PAs have.
Yep.
And so that's when the big PA thing started to come in. And once that really big PA thing took hold, gradually bands went back to using smaller gear again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it makes sense. Let the PA do the work, and then you can keep a relatively comfortable volume on stage and retain some of your hearing.
Yeah.
And, so the drummer doesn't have to have his own PA system to compete.
No. Well, I mean, we just did 3 shows in Melbourne with Chain, and I did them with a 22 watt Fender.
Great.
Little Fender Deluxe.
Yep.
The new Tone Master.
The Tone Master.
Fender Deluxe,
Sure.
which weighs nothing.
Yeah, I haven't played one in a live environment, but I've played a few in shops and mates' houses, and they're surprisingly pretty close to the money, I reckon. Have you had yours a little while, Phil? Like, tell me about what took you down that path, the pure lightweightness of them.
Well, to go down that lot.
Do you own it, or is it one you just use at the venue sort of thing? Like the
No,
Tone Master?
I bought it. I bought it. I've got about four different Fender setups.
Yeah.
I became a Fender Australia artist in 1988, and I've used Fender ever since. And so I've got a Fender Cyber Champ, which is an interesting amp. That's loud as buggery with 112. And I've got a Fat DeVille with 212, 65 watt with 212s.
Yep.
But I can't lift it anymore.
Yeah.
And then I've got a little Fender Rumble bass head.
Yep.
Which I use with a small Fender box. And that's a good medium sort of power amp.
Acoustic venues and things like that? Guitar playing?
No.
Electric?
I use that for with an effects pedal because it doesn't have reverb and that sort of thing. It's a bass amp.
Yeah.
But as a sort of an intermediate amp, like I did a gig with Jeff Atchison not long ago, and the little 22 watt one really, Jeff had I don't know what it is, a 50, 60 watt amp, might be 100, I don't know, but with two 12s.
The Olbrich one he's been playing?
Yes.
Made in Melbourne
yes,
one? Yep.
That one. Yep. And the little Fender didn't we weren't mic'd.
Okay.
It wasn't a big stage, but we weren't mic'd, and so the 22 watts really had trouble.
Yeah.
It cut through, but it didn't have much meat.
Yeah.
So the next time I did something with Jeff and some other guitarists, I used the Rumble amp because that's actually a 200 watt amp.
Sure.
And I've got it's rated at 125 watts 12, so I can actually really make quite a big sound with that.
Yeah.
You know? But with chain, of course, I'm not competing with other guitar players or keyboard players.
Yep.
So I was able to use the small one. And, of course, when you work big stages, you can always have it put through the foldback.
Yeah, absolutely. The bigger the stages are, probably the better the engineer is, probably better the space and the room is. And you can get better
and look,
reinforcement.
the thing about the Tone Master series is they've managed to reproduce the valve sound.
Yeah, and it feels like it. Does it feel like a valve amp? Same sort of interaction you get?
It does actually.
Yeah.
You know how when you start to drive a valve amp, it starts to go fuzzy. There's a sort of It's not that pleasant a sound really.
There's a sweet spot. It's either like really driven and kind of like fuzzy on purpose, or it's kind of that halfway, a little bit unpleasant. You said.
Yeah. So it does that. Because what they've done is they've created an vastly overpowered digital amp, and then attenuated that down somehow.
Sure.
So it actually, it's got 100 watts of digital power,
right?
But it's only putting out 22 watts. So
gotcha.
Everything is within a safety margin.
Yeah.
Actually, Shane Pacey from Bondi Cigars put me onto it.
Yep.
He said he'd just got a twin.
Yep.
Which uses the same principle, 200 watt digital amp, and attenuated down to 85.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely keen to try more of those, because I think the technology's definitely improved since the Cyber Twin and those sort of cyber amps came out in I guess it was mid-2000s, maybe even earlier. I remember seeing Buddy Guy on stage with them, I think, or even another one of the Fender artists from the States playing them a fair bit. Yeah.
Cyber amps are interesting, but like most of the sounds on it aren't usable.
Yeah, right. Good bit of fun, but
they're a good bit of fun. But I used the Cyber Champ on my album quite a bit,
right?
And because there are some sounds that are really good, but the trouble is some of the sounds they tend to boost. They have a great sound, but in order to get that sound, you get a lot of background noise as well.
Right. Right.
So it can lift up, any sort of buzzes and things get amplified.
Yeah, gotcha. So we are in Devonport. We mentioned that at the very start of the chat. What brings you to Devonport, mate? We're here for the Fourth
Valley Blues Festival, indeed.
And you've played a few of these over the years?
Yeah, have.
Yeah.
Actually, we were here before the COVID lockdown. We came over with Chain.
Yep. And you've quite frequently come to Tassie. I know that the first time I saw you live was in Tasmania. Must have been a workshop you played, like a tuning, just an acoustic guitar workshop in Launceston, and that was I think put on by Barrett's Music, I believe, and it was like an upstairs venue. I think it was in like the Quadrant Plaza or Quadrant Mall area in Launceston.
Okay.
I remember coming home with like a tambourine music, open chord, open tuning sort of chart. And it must have been, I reckon, 95, 96, something like that.
Yeah, probably Takamine, possibly.
Right. Yeah, okay.
Or would it have been Guild?
I think it was a Guild. I remember seeing you with Guilds, I'm pretty sure. But that was my first introduction to what you do and an insight to your playing. And that definitely opened my eyes up to a lot of tuning opportunities and styles of music and using a slide, things like that. And then I think I was lucky enough to perform with you, must have been a few years later.
Was it the Royal Oak?
Royal Oak. Now, there was a festival that day.
And you were 16.
I was.
Actually,
I think I was younger, to be honest. I think I was 15.
Well, really?
Yeah.
Gosh.
I think I was only 15 still. And great memories of that particular night. Because I remember seeing you, I think you played for a venue out at Inveresk Tramyards that day. It was like a festival of some sort.
That's right, yeah.
It was called the Gone South Festival, or
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I remember that.
So I remember hopping in your car and getting a ride from there to the venue and having a quick chat about things, and I think I was quite nervous at that point. But you definitely made me feel relaxed and welcomed, and we had a great fun night of blues, and we've been mates ever since. And I know that's as a young performer, you definitely made me comfortable and welcomed. You know, a lot of players.
Yeah, well, like I mean, I was the same when I was young, and I first started. You know, like when I was still at high school, and bands would come across from Melbourne. You know, and I was a wide-eyed kid. You know, and I'd go up and talk to them, and they were always lovely to me. You know, always great, and you know, some of the people I still know. You know, I still keep in touch with.
Great. Do you have any early mentors in that regard, like maybe Tasmanian artists that kind of not took you under their wing, but someone you could look up to and maybe have conversations with, or helped you out with gear, or I don't know. Is there anyone who was like a shining light in that regard in your early career?
Well, one particular thing I always remember was going and seeing Merv Benton and the Tamlers from Melbourne coming over, and I think they played at Ulverston somewhere. And they had Les Stackpole on guitar, and Les was just unbelievable back then, you know. Like, but as far as guitarists here, I mean, there was a local guy here, because there were the Reverbs in Devonport with Gus Gower, played lead guitar, and then there was a great jazz player that played the sort of dances where they played standards and jazz things, named Don Bradley. He was a wonderful guitar player.
Right.
But my real direct influences didn't really come until I went to Melbourne, and I started to hang about with people like Lobby Lloyd and got to know. Well, we used to sort of hang around with Billy Thorpe and his band, and then the lads from Spectrum.
Yep.
And then I a couple of times I had people in my band, like in bands that I was in, like Gary Young and Wayne Duncan, who later on were in Daddy Cool. So. Those sort of people all had influences, and you know, for instance, the drummer in Tony Worsley's Blue Jays probably had more of an influence on me as a guitarist than guitar players did at that time. Right. Because the whole essence was to try and be tight. Right. And you know, sort of. So I just grab this guitar over here. Yeah. And so you know, if we were playing a feel that maybe went or something like that. Yeah. He'd really sit on me and say, "Now listen to my hi-hat, and listen to my snare drum, and listen to my bass drum." Yeah. And put things in that fit that. So something like that might become. So there'd be, you start making gaps, and the idea was to try and be tight. And by the time we we put the first a couple of chain lineups together. By then I was working with Barry Sullivan, Barry Harvey, Warren Morgan, and we just became so tight with that sort of philosophy of all listening to each other and trying. Yep. And I remember one night we were playing, and in the middle of a song, Warren stopped playing piano just for a little while, and then he started playing it again. And at the end of the set, I said, why'd you stop playing? And he said, it was so tight, I couldn't tell whether my piano was even working. So he had to stop playing to see whether it was actually working.
That's great. It's like the key with the click track, isn't it? If you're playing with a click track and you can't hear it, you're doing all right. Whereas if you can hear the click track, you must be out of time somehow. And that's funny. He couldn't hear his own piano.
And playing to click tracks is a real art.
Oh, it's absolutely.
I had to do a lot of that because I played everything on my new album. I had to reference a lot of it with click tracks.
Yeah.
And I used to be a mighty click. I used to be so good at doing it because I did so much session work back in the 70s, and I found it really hard, really difficult. I was out of practice. It's a real art.
Absolutely.
And
let's talk about that. Let's talk about your album. So was this initiated from the lockdown sort of period, from the 2020? Was the idea to just keep yourself busy, or was it the idea to actually make a record and to, put out some new works?
Well, I was due to do I was overdue to do a new album.
Yeah.
And I had lots of material that was sort of half written or finished.
Yeah.
And I sort of decided that I either wanted to do a completely live acoustic album, or I wanted to do an electric album. And then I decided that the acoustic stuff that I was working on wasn't developed well enough. So I thought I'd shelve that and I'll do an electric one. And then the lockdown happened. So bugger, what'll I do? So I got myself some drum pads, and did some work on that to make sure they sounded good. They sounded like real drums, and then I started working on the album. I had a little Fender bass that I've had for a while.
Yep.
And so I basically started recording. As I said, like using a click track, putting down a guitar, acoustic and vocal.
Yep.
Then putting down the drum spread over a few tracks.
Yep.
And then I'd have to mix the drums down to stereo and move them because I didn't have that much space on the recording.
Oh, right. So you weren't working on a computer as such? You're working on
I was working on a workstation.
Okay.
And
so no screens.
Oh no, it was small screen.
Small screen, okay. Yeah.
But it was limited in the number of tracks that it had.
Sure.
Basically 8 tracks with 4 stereo tracks.
Okay.
So.
Yep.
And so in a way the process was a little bit like the Beatles used with, sort of
down.
A little bit like that. Not really the same, because things have come such a long way.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed that because as I got into it, I started to treat it a bit like a day job.
Sure.
It was a bit like getting up in the morning, having breakfast, and going to a session.
Yeah, on Song Row or something. Yeah.
And so and then the same thing with vocals. If I decided something wanted vocals, I had to pick a point at which to do the vocals.
Yeah.
So that I still had spare stereo track to mix them to, the backings to.
Sure. It would have been a great project, and I'm sure you learnt a lot of stuff down during that project as well. Like, have you done much of your own recordings over the years? Like,
yes.
I know you've got a lot of records out.
I've
many of those been under your own steam?
Yeah, I've done a lot.
Yeah.
All my virtually all my acoustic albums have been done at home.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Look, back in the early '80s or mid '80s, when they started bringing out things like ADATs recording, and I had started to work solo then, and I thought, well, I'd done an album in the studio, live, basically live.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was live actually. I went into the studio, put some mics on my acoustic, ran the acoustic into an amp up in a corner.
Yeah.
Put up a vocal mic, and a little table next to me with a bottle of wine.
Yeah.
And a joint.
Yeah.
And I basically played a set, like
in a live sort of style.
Just as if I was playing live. I did about a 40, 50-minute set.
Yeah.
Had a break, had a bit of a listen to it.
Yeah.
And went back and did it again.
Yeah.
Just did the whole same set again.
Yeah.
And then picked the best of the 2 takes.
That's the yellow covered.
The yellow one, yeah, It's Blues.
It's Blues.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was done at Sweet 16 Studios in Brisbane, and then about then all that gear started coming out.
Yeah.
And I went, well, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
You know, this is this would be the way to go.
Yeah.
So I started off. I bought a stereo Yamaha mic,
Mm-hmm.
and I already had a big old 1938 Western electric cardioid.
Wow.
So I just started using those,
Uh-huh.
and then a fellow in Melbourne that imports high-end equipment, been very good to me over the years, sold me a couple of Russian Octava mics.
Yes.
And so I got a MK216 vocal mic,
Mm-hmm.
and a little 003 or something, little cardioid.
Great.
A little condenser.
Yep.
And then a little bit later on, from there, I bought a couple of little Neve preamps, and since then I've bought a couple of. I bought a beautiful Rode valve mic.
Is it the K2?
Yeah.
Yep.
Stunning microphone.
Yeah.
And a little set of matched Rode
Mm-hmm.
stereo mics.
Yep.
And so I've done it all there.
Great.
And then I also got a thing, preamp and compressor, a compressor limiter made by Safe Sound in England, called a P1.
Right.
And that's fabulous for just for being able to add just the tiniest little bit of compression to vocal.
Yes.
Just so you can't hear it, but
Yeah.
just squeezes it into the right place.
Yeah, and especially if you're going into a digital workstation, you want to avoid digital distortion at all costs.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
if you've got a compressor in your line, that's going to duck under that peak level,
Yeah.
and that'll save your skin. If you've got a really good performance, and you go back to have a listen and you've got a few peaks, it's like, it's the worst thing. But if you've got a compressor in line, that's a great little safety net.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, you don't want to hear the compression.
No, you don't.
So it's a
catch-22.
tricky. They're really tricky things, and that's where I think of all things that should be valve.
Yeah.
Compressors should be valve. Really.
I agree. Yeah, I picked up a Universal Audio LA610 recently. It's like a valve preamp it's got high and low EQ, and it's got a compressor circuit in that as well.
Yeah.
And that's great for all sources. It's so nice. Yeah. But you got to be careful because it compresses a lot if you're not careful. So you got to keep that under control. What's your go-to sort of mic positioning then? Like you're talking about you've recorded your acoustics a lot lately. Was it so you're using like an XY pattern perhaps with your condensers, or are you going for more of a room sound?
Actually,
you got a go-to?
Everything depends on what guitar I'm using, and
Great.
And also what the acoustic might be doing. If it's a sort of full-bodied picking thing, yes, I'll be using an XY, or what I've often done is use a the normal sort of stereo position, the 3-to-1.
Gotcha.
3-to-1 position.
Yeah.
But shove one in another mic in the middle.
Okay.
And maybe a little bit further away.
Yeah.
And just, you've got to be careful because you can get phasing problems.
Yes.
But I found a really good XY or 3-to-1 stereo position, and then put a big full-bodied mic a bit further away.
Yeah.
That can work a treat.
Beautiful. And I guess it comes down to the environment that you're into. If you're in a not so pleasant environment, you want to get close to the source as you can, whereas if you're in a nice space, absolutely get that microphone 6 to 10 feet away and let it bloom and pick up some ambience off the space.
Well, the other thing, of course, is that I've got 3 of these now. I've got these as the Cole Clark Little Ladies.
Yep.
This one was made for me, actually. It's silky oak back and sides.
It's a nice finish on the back, actually.
And,
I like that.
Yeah, it's gorgeous, isn't it?
Sunburst, yeah.
And this is Bunya Pine.
Really?
And it's a gorgeous guitar. But I've got a redwood one, and I've got an all blackwood one. The blackwood one's quite harsh, and sort of it doesn't move as much, but it makes a great slide guitar.
Right.
And it's really good for slide. And the one that's got a redwood top is actually a gorgeous recording guitar. And what's great about these small-bodied things is you can shove a mic right in the hole almost. Just out of reach of where you won't whack it with your hand.
Yeah.
You get this very immediate sound, and so a lot of it was done just using that technique. One mic straight up the hole.
Yep.
And then a couple of other mics just to make up the 3-to-1 pattern.
That's interesting, and I guess having the time and especially the experience, because you were saying you're a session player a lot in the 70s. Was that mainly on electric, or did you play a lot of acoustic as well for those sessions?
No, I didn't play much acoustic in those days. I did session work where they'd want an acoustic rhythm.
Yeah.
That used to give me the absolute shit section. Actually,
what do you got?
You'd get a producer and he'd want you to be absolutely. They'd want it. There's no expression.
Like a robot, yeah.
Just.
Right.
That's what you just drive me nuts. But the trouble is, in a big mix, something like that can sound great.
It's one of those things, isn't it? Like at the time, you want the biggest, fullest sound, but actually, if you think in the future, like you try and think down the track, where's this guitar going to sit in the mix? Is it going to be a tiny little? And that's a great perspective to have as a player, isn't it? When you're doing your own recordings, to think, where's it going to sit? I mean, to try and think forward like that.
Well, that's where this is where producers can come into it. Where, they and I guess as a musician, you sort of head more towards that production thing as you get older, anyway.
Yeah.
As you get more experience.
Yeah.
You imagine what the end result will be.
Yeah.
Well, you hopefully will.
Yeah. We're coming up to a bit of a time restraint. Maybe I might just ask one or two more quick questions before we have to wrap up for today, Phil. Yeah. You've been very lucky enough to tour with some very iconic American blues artists here in Australia, playing or just getting to meet some of these iconic American blues artists. Are there any that have had the strongest connection at the time, or ones that you look back on now? Are there any artists in particular that you think you're really honoured to have met and to worked with, and things you've learnt and things like that?
All of them, really. But the ones that really stick out in my mind are obviously Muddy Waters. Yeah. Because I did 2 tours with him around the country, supporting as the support act, and he was just the greatest guy. And everyone anything that you ever hear about Muddy, you know, they have great stories to tell.
It's all true.
And I was really proud to have worked, not only supporting but actually working with him, playing with him was champion Jack Dupree.
Sure.
And we did a number of shows. I did about 7 or 8 shows, I think, together.
Yeah.
And he was great. You know, Albert Collins, Roy Buchanan.
Yeah.
I mean, they were all great people to tour with, and you know, Roy and I sort of became quite friends with each other. I did quite a few shows with him. And it was really, really nice. You know, some of the artists, you know, after I'd sort of toured with them and supported them, they came back to Australia and asked for me to do it again with them.
Great.
You know.
That's good.
That was
Beautiful.
very pleasant. But
Yeah.
but no, they've all been lovely people, and
Yeah.
you know, and you usually find that most people that are successful, you know, they're successful because they're nice people.
Yeah.
Because if they were assholes,
That's right. They wouldn't have lasted.
no one
2
would want to
minutes.
know them.
Yeah. Yeah. Wise words. Listen up to that, kids. You know, you got to be a nice individual. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great, Phil. And have you ever met up with any other artists like that in the state? Have you toured in America under your own steam, or have you
No,
been there?
no, never been to
with
America.
Chad? Never been to America.
Never been to America. I ended up.
Wow.
I went off to England to do a guitar festival.
Yep.
And did a bunch of shows in England, and then went off and toured Ireland. And then I went back to Ireland a couple more times. I just loved Ireland.
Yeah.
It's just mighty.
Yeah.
And then I've done 5 trips to Cambodia and performed there.
Uh-huh.
Performed in Vietnam, and then a whole bunch of gigs in Bali, which were,
Wow.
you know, not those sort of unofficial gigs really.
Sure.
But, you know. But
holiday.
it's funny because I toured with so many American artists, you know, like touring around in a van with canned heat. You know, that was a mad experience. I tell you, that's crazy.
I can imagine.
Good guys though, really great guys.
Was that with Junior Watson on guitar? Was he in the
No,
band at
no,
that time?
this was
Before that.
the one that I toured around like that was with Harvey Mandel,
Right.
the Bear.
Yep.
Harvey and
Larry Taylor.
Alfonso de la Parra.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was great. That was a great experience actually touring around with them, and then Chain did a Australia-wide tour with the Doobie Brothers a few years back.
Yep.
And then I went to New Zealand and supported them solo,
Great.
and that was great. And at the end of each night, Pat Simmons got me wired up with all the in-ear monitoring, and I went out and used his guitar and listened to the music with him each night.
Awesome.
That was great.
What a trip.
Yeah, it was a trip actually.
Yeah.
But we're about to do the Blues Fest at Byron Bay
As Chain.
as Chain.
Yep. With Dirk
And on the
Matt.
Saturday, Dirk on bass, Trapper on drums, Matt.
Great.
And on the Saturday, listen to this for a scary day. On the Saturday, we've got Christone Kingfish Ingram on,
Yep.
followed by Marcus King,
Right.
followed by Chain, followed by Eric Gales,
Wow.
followed by Buddy Guy, followed by Joe Bonamassa.
Yeah. No pressure at all, Phil.
No pressure at all. Only 5 of the world's greatest guitar players, and I'm shoved in the middle of it, the
Bloody hell.
bastards. No, I'm really looking forward to it. But, what a day, you know.
That sounds. I'd love to be in front of that stage,
Oh,
plonked in the
yeah.
middle of that, because that's going to be a treat for everyone who's involved.
Yeah, and I'm
That's gonna be a
really
treat for
looking
yourself.
forward to Buddy Guy because
Yeah.
Matt toured with him actually,
Right.
but didn't really get to know him. I met him once on that tour and ended up spending about 20, 30 minutes sitting in a corner talking to him about Muddy Waters and Chicago and
Sure.
and things. So I'm really looking forward to catching up with him again.
Yeah. Oh, mate, you're in for a treat. And I I'm going to leave you with it for today. I'm sure there's much more we could talk about, but have a great show tonight at 4th. I'm going to try and make it around and have a listen. Great to see you again, Phil, and hope to catch up with you in the near future, and maybe we'll talk more about guitars. I want to talk about this guitar you made. That'll be another podcast in itself.
Yeah, that'll be another one. But we can do a Zoom.
Yep. All right, let's do that.
Thanks, Pete.
Cheers, Phil. Thanks for listening, folks, to another episode of Say It With Guitars. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the podcast, share it around to your mates, leave a good review, and hopefully we'll see you next time.